Hi everyone, this is Anne, and there is a trend going on that I wanted to just talk about in this video.
Okay, so right off the bat, we have an important issue here, and I think your entire video suffers because of it. Antinatalism is a philosophical position. It's definitely not a trend. So if you made this video to address a trend, you should have specified which people are part of that trend and what their precise arguments are, rather than just group all of us together, i.e., the child-free and the anti-nihilists, as you did here, and also by using the word anti-nihilist in the title of your video.
And maybe get people's opinions and their perspectives on this. So what I've been noticing is that there are a shit ton of posts and articles that I see to try and get people to not have children and to kind of make them say that, oh, you'll regret it or it's not a good thing to do.
So I think you're confusing the vegan child-free movement with anti-nihilism here. A natural vegan made the same mistake, and I responded to her as well. It's important to distinguish between both positions. Child-free people, generally speaking, do not want children for personal reasons. They believe that their lives would suffer as a result, either because they don't like kids at all, or because they think that their lives will simply be better without kids. Anti-nihilists, on the other hand, generally speaking, oppose it on a philosophical level. We don't believe that we should have children for altruistic reasons. We could want to have a child and decide not to have the child in order to prevent suffering. In your video, you kind of want to pick a fight with both sides. You very briefly get into the morality of having children, and then you jump to the personal benefits of having children. Nonetheless, even though I'm an anti-nihilist for ethical reasons, I'll address both concerns here, because I think there's a strong case to be made for both the ethical and the personal sides.
Climate change here, overpopulation there, and some of the, especially like in the vegan community, there are a lot of anti-natalists, people who say you shouldn't have children, you should only adopt, there's already too much children in the world. But the problem is way more complex than that. First of all, our world can bear way more people than we do now. It's just the bad distribution of resources and how we manage our society that causes it to be a problem. But most of the overpopulation is in poverty areas. Most of the homeless children are in poverty areas, are in countries where there's a lot of poverty, where there's no birth control, no proper education and stuff like that. Because as people go up on the socioeconomic ladder, the birth rate actually drops. So it's not really here that it's a problem, and that's why people should look at the root cause, what causes people in these other countries to pop out the children, and that should be addressed.
Agreed, it should be addressed. The problem is that arguing for the complexity of a problem is not an argument against the behaviors that are encouraged by the so-called anti-nihilist that you're mentioning here. We can use the same line of argument against veganism. We can say, oh, animal agriculture and factory farming is terrible, and we need to do something about it, but the problem is so complex. There are lobbyists who are bought by big meat and big dairy, and we need to fight, but, you know, if I stop buying animal products, it's not going to change anything. So we should just lobby against them. Now, in this instance, you notice right away that I'm making a black or white fallacy. I'm giving you two options, either fighting, lobbying, or purchasing, changing your consumer habits. So the truth is there is obviously more than one option here. They're not mutually exclusive. And I've already mentioned this to you in a comment in your previous video on this subject, and you haven't even agreed, and yet it props up again here. So in that example, you would agree that 1, fighting back, and 2, boycotting animal products can both be done at the same time. And I would also add that there's a third way to get at the problem, and that's by not creating more consumers who will likely purchase these animal products and not contribute to fighting. Now, we know for a fact that by creating a child, they will at some point be able to decide for themselves what they want to consume, and that you create the risk that this happens, that they are not vegan. So, and contrary to what many vegans believe, the risk is significant that this happens. It's not a minor risk. Um, and it's that way because we're social animals and we tend to conform to our environments. So if the environment is hostile towards veganism, there will be less chances that a person can sustain the practice.
These other countries to pop out the children, and that should be addressed. You can't keep adopting and adopting. That's not going to solve the problem, and that's not going to help the parents who often can't take care of their children.
Having your own biological child is not going to help those parents either. You're avoiding the issue here. The issue is that there are children in need. You could help a child. Imagine that a child is drowning right now, and you can save the life of the child if you decide not to have a child. What you're saying when you leave that child to drown is, sorry, my genes are more important. We do this when we want a pet. We don't go to the shelter to adopt a cat or a dog because we think we are addressing the root cause of the problem. Of course not. We do it because it's the best thing we can do, considering what we know, and we know we are at least making a difference for that one animal that we're going to adopt. We don't let the best become the enemy of the better.
And then not only that, but it's also a hassle, and it costs a lot of money often. So anyway,
Well, I've heard these arguments before, usually leveled at vegans from people who don't want to become vegans. It's a hassle. It's difficult to find food, especially when you're on the road. It's difficult when you're with family and friends who are not vegans. It's a hassle. You have to bring your own food, and it's more expensive because the demand for the alternative products is not as high. Do we care? No, we still do it because we think it's the right thing to do. As for the costs, I live in Canada, and it can be pretty cheap from what I found if you adopt through the public system.
have kids. I think it can be selfish both ways, having kids and not having kids. Having kids for, you want to have kids, it's kind of a selfish thing. Even though when they are born, you have to take care of them. So then you have to become selfless in a way to take care of this completely helpless, defenseless human being. You have to change your life.
It can be selfish to not have kids if your only reason for not having kids is because you have ambitions and the kids would get in the way. Sure. But it can't be unselfish to have a child. The selfishness of having children is inherent, unless it's completely accidental. You're fulfilling your own desire by having a child. You're not benefiting the child who has no need to come into the world. And even once you have a child, it wouldn't be selfless to take care of them. It's become an obligation. It's actually punishable if you don't take care of your child. So it means you're protecting yourself by taking care of them. And this is not a cynical view, it's just true. What I would say instead is that it involves a lot of self-sacrificing, but that isn't to be confused with selflessness. I mean, taking care of someone who has 50% of your genes, which you've been programmed by evolution to take care of, while it is punishable not to do so, is anything but selfless. You want selfless? Take that roughly $250,000 that it costs to raise a child to the age of 18 and go to a website like GiveWell and give that money away to people in need. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to guilt trip anyone into doing this, but let's face it, it is the definition of selfless.
And these very, very negative articles about having children in the first place. So I went on to look on the internet, and indeed I found a lot of posts about people regretting having children. That doesn't mean they didn't love their children, they just regretted making that decision because they had to give up a lot of their previous life.
Yes, that is one reason, but there are many more. I'd recommend reading the book No Kids, 40 Good Reasons Not to Have Children by Corinne Maillet. She has had 2 children, and she wrote this book. It's written in tongue-in-cheek, but it's got a lot of really valid criticism to the reason why people have children and what children actually bring into your life. And if you think you're prepared and you know what they're going to bring, you don't. It's as simple as that. You don't. What's really surprising to most people is that a decrease in happiness is not the exception. It's the expected result.
So one reason we think that our children bring us a lot of happiness is because they don't. Now, heroin. It would be, you hear people say that heroin is a great source of human misery. And there is a way in which it is, but there's a way in which it isn't. I don't know about you, but I've had back surgery, so I've had the opiates, morphine, Demerol. They're great. No misery. No. Nirvana, heaven, joy, bliss. Just about the best feeling I've ever had. So how can heroin be a source of misery when every time you take it, you feel great? Well, one answer is that heroin makes you feel so good that it will crowd out every other source of pleasure in your life. You will stop working. You will stop interacting with your family. You'll stop paying for your house. You will stop brushing your teeth. You will just go sit in a corner anywhere you can and take heroin because that thing is so good. Now, the heroin itself will make you feel good, but the net effect of heroin is to ruin your life. What does that sound like? Yeah, okay. So, you look at a little baby and it's a little bit like a heroin high. Oh joy, oh joy, oh joy, oh joy. And the little baby is a heroin high, but the little baby will stop you from doing all the things that were slightly less highs, like, going to the movies, seeing your friends, having sex, bathing regularly, devoting yourself to your job, reading books, you name it. The list is long. Children crowd out the other pleasures of life because they're just so demanding. They take so much from us. So the net effect of children is that your net happiness can go down, even though every time you look at that child, you go, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. I once had a woman come up out of the audience after I talked about children and happiness, and she said, Professor Gilbert, my child is my greatest source of joy. To which I said, when you have one source of joy, it is by definition your greatest source of joy. And this is true, not entirely, but it's not a bad summary of life for many parents.
Feed the baby, like, I know, you have to, before you have children, you have to realize that you're going to make sacrifices. And if someone is very attached to, for example, they're very extroverted, they like to travel, like going out, meeting their friends, I think for those kind of people, it's going to be harder. If they don't really want the children very much, or they haven't planned for it or haven't thought it through. Some people just make these decisions like that, and some people shouldn't be parents.
I completely agree with you there. Except, and this is going to sound conceited, but I'm pretty sure you think you've thought it through, and I'm pretty sure you haven't. Why? Well, first, considering your arguments, or lack thereof, against antinatalism, and secondly, because you think that a balance of information is just Googling to get random opinions and browsing the Daily Mail. Thinking something through, to me, involves studying. It involves philosophizing. It involves looking at the scientific research, not just Googling and looking for some random reports of how people are feeling. In the rest of your video, you talk about how it will be doable for you to have children due to your favorable personality type and your life situation. You don't say why you want to have biological children, but rather you focus on the how. It seems very much to be a case of because I can rather than because it is the right thing to do. Now, I don't know about you, but because I can is not something that I'm very interested in. And I don't think other vegans should be interested in that logic either. Because I can is a line that non-vegans will use in order to defend the status quo. If we're not only concerned with what we can do, but what we ought to do, then I would ask another question. Is this the right thing to do? It's probably not the best question. I think we ought to ask ourselves, is this the best that I can do? Personal happiness matters, but it should not be the only thing that matters to us. If you're a vegan, then I believe that you already agree with the sentiment, and I want to raise the concern that it's not consistent with this sentiment to have biological children in the world we currently live in and the options that we have to help others. I'm sorry, I know it's not fun to hear, but if you're intent on passing down your genes, you're condemning very real people to very real suffering, and likely non-human animals as well. Now, if you're not concerned by the ethical side of the argument, definitely do watch the Dan Gilbert video in its entirety to see some actual data on how we are wired to fool ourselves to believe that children will make us happier. And we fool ourselves in many other ways. Dan Gilbert actually has a book on happiness and the many ways in which we are very, very bad at predicting what will make us happy. And children is just one small part of that. I'd also recommend reading two highly relevant books, The Optimism Bias and The Denial of Death. Links will be in the description.